In the second chapter of John, they have a story about the wedding feast of Cana. The exoteric teaching, the regular teaching, is that Jesus turning the water into wine symbolizes the wine of the new covenant as opposed to the old covenant of Moses. And they pretty much keep it simple like that. There's some things that are in this particular chapter that if you don't know anything about ancient times, then you might believe the exoteric teaching. The esoteric teaching has to do with this thing called the Atlantean Age, basically. The Atlantean Age is the time period before the flood. And the survivors of the flood, you know, were basically, it ended up being a series of tribes. Well, okay, so in chapter 2, in verse 4, after Mary asks him about wine, she says, "Hey, there's no wine." He says this weird thing. Jesus says, "What have I to do with thee?" And when he says that, he's making, and you know what he has to do with, what they have to do with each other is it's mother and son. But they're at a wedding feast in Galilee. And Galilean, the term Galilean means a mixed breed. See, in ancient times, it was kind of like common knowledge that if you were a blood member of a tribe, that you're that you could have that you had a memory, an ancestral memory, like your bloodline carried with it memories of your whole tribe. Like you could remember the shit that your dad did, and you could remember the shit that your grandparents did, and you could remember, and some folks could remember, all the way back to time periods where humans interacted with gods, and and that was definitely the teaching with the Jews. And so, what he's making a reference to her, he's kind of calling her out because they're in the middle of a bunch of mixed bloods, and she's playing the, hey, you're my son role right now. When they're not, they're not in Judea, they're in Galilee. They're hanging out with the mixed breeds anyways. And the point of Jesus or Christ or the Christ being is making the connection, is basically the meshing of your spirit world and your material world into when your physical body and your spiritual body into the same thing. That's the next step of evolution, is that we should be able to develop a relationship with divine beings that doesn't have to do with the memory of our ancestors. And we have to do that because survival has dictated that we have started mixed breeding at this point, and now it's so far beyond that that if the world had not adapted, and by adapt, basically I mean, if the Christ being, this is the esoteric teaching. I'm not trying to tell you something like I'm just coming up with it. I'm just giving you the esoteric teaching, so don't get out of hand, bros. But what I'm trying to say is that the people, the teaching is that the people who were the Jews could remember all the way back to God. They could remember the deeds of David, and they could remember the deeds of Solomon because they kept their bloodline pure, and they retained that spiritual ancestral memory. And it's an insight into why people like Hitler wanted to kill the Jews, why people like the colonialists tried to kill the Native Americans and tried to kill off the Irish and tried to kill off the Scottish, because they wanted to kill that ancestral memory so that they couldn't remember what the truth was anymore. As long as there was people that was keeping it real in their tribes, there was people that you couldn't fucking lie to, because they had a direct, no, I remember what my ancestors did because we have that blood connection. And and that's why the contemporary society, civilization, if you will, has gone out of its way to teach you to not be a member of your family, to lead you away from that. And what Christ is Christ is the spiritual side of us coming back through and compensating where otherwise we'd be limited. You know what I mean? He's making the jump, like now that everybody's blood is so mixed up, you have to make the evolutionary jump to be able to connect to God on your own. And it's a reference to Atlantean times, because in Atlantean times, every night, you saw the gods. They walked around, they talked to you and stuff, because we were still only so evolved as material beings that we had a 1 foot, more in the spiritual world than we do today, because of our adaptations and our developments as humans. The more we became civilized, the less we became spiritual, and the less we could see those things. The more we became material, the less our minds were available for the spiritual. And so, what Jesus is doing, or what Christ is, or what the esoteric teaching is that humans have to go straight to the source now, because the Jews, even the Jews, these tribal peoples have started to monopolize the information, and they're trying to stomp out whole cultures, committing genocide on people so that they can't remember, and you have to have their version of the truth. Um, but what I'm saying is that the Creator knew it was coming. Creator knew the Creator intuitively knew how humanity was to go. It was going to go, and it's just the next level of evolution is that now that we can make the jump from having to remember what our ancestors remember to being able to have a spiritual connection now, and to be able to participate in the divine nature now. You know what I mean? It was the comeback for the Pharisees. You know what I mean? It was a way of redeeming. That's why Jesus calls people hypocrites. Do you know what I mean? That's why the Pharisees especially, like, you hypocrites, because he knows that they can remember what happened with God and their ancestors, and that they would still sit there and lie to a peoples, and manipulate things so that they can be in a position of power. I know it's a never-ending lesson. Get used to it, buddies.